So I'm going to get into a few more details. The last video that I just put up talked about how in both sides of the dating advice world, the gender war, the women advising women on what to do and what to look for in a date, and the men advising men on what to look for and what to do on a date. Both of them are insane and horrible, and neither of them follows actual research, and they're giving you bad advice that ruins your life. So we're going to get into some more details about that particular topic that I just addressed, which is this fantasy in the pop culture about the alpha male. Women telling other women to look for a man who's strong so he can protect you and he's a good provider to your family, and that he's a good leader by being domineering. And the manosphere says the same thing. Get covered in muscle, make a lot of money, and be aggressive and domineering. Those are the only options that you're told today. And they're both horrific and wrong. So, where did that come from? Where did that story begin? And this is very painful. But we see in the genetic record and the archaeological record the specific series of events that led to that archetype of the big muscular guy who protects his woman, and he's jealous and possessive, and he provides everything she needs by being violent and selfish. We know exactly where that came from. It wasn't a tribe. Tribes don't behave like that. It wasn't the early agricultural societies. They didn't behave like that. What happened specifically was that about 10,000 years ago, people in the southern steppes in central Eurasia started domesticating animals. The bull and the horse were domesticated. And originally they were domesticated as a food source. You just keep them all in a corral, and then you can kill them when you want to, instead of having to hunt them down. So horses were a food source. They were eating horse meat because it was considered to have like vital energy. The horse is such a good runner. So they were eating horses. And it took a while before they realized they could ride a horse. It was like a few thousand years before they started riding horses. And it was bareback. It's not easy. It's not fun. But there's a critical thing about how you treat a horse to be able to ride it. Modern day, we're a bit better about this, but back then, the way they learned to get a horse ready to be ridden was that you break the horse. And the way you did that was by taking a newborn horse away from their family and keeping them caged up and beating them over and over again until they lost the will to live. They lost their spirit. They lost any hope of freedom. And then you could ride a horse. And that was bad. That's not a nice thing to do. But it got worse when there was one guy in particular who was completely selfish and callous and had no empathy for anyone else. And these kinds of people do pop up. People who we can see with an electroencephalogram. We just put wires touching your skin on a little cap. And we can see there's some people who are born with an inability to empathize. It's neurologically permanent. They never change. It's a result of certain genes they have that are misfiring. They're not functioning properly. So every now and again in tribal societies, there'd be someone born like that. It was a rare event. It was just like someone being born with dwarfism. Just happens sometimes. But when it happened in a tribe, the tribe would see this selfish, abusive person, and they'd say, "That's a demon." And they would hunt him down and kill him. So there's Native American traditions where that demon in human skin, who has no empathy and is willing to harm others, they're called a Wendigo or Wendigo. So we hunted those. Nowadays we call them psychopaths. It is genetic. It's a permanent neurological dysfunction, and that means they're never going to get better. We've found ways to counsel them so that they don't abuse people while we're watching, but as soon as they think they can get away with it, they'll do it again. And psychopaths as a population are about 100 times more violent than everyone else. They are most violent criminals. They are almost all cases of sexual assault. And they used to be very rare because we hunted them. But with the beginnings of agriculture, you had a few problems that happened. The first problem was that people were eating a lot of calories from grain, but they weren't getting a lot of other nutrition. So they had a low nutrition diet. Their teeth, their bones, their organs, they were all aging faster, wearing down. Tribal societies, people regularly live into their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Agricultural societies, you're lucky to make it to 45. You didn't live long in agricultural society. It wasn't fun. It was full of disease, poverty. The tribal societies had a better lifestyle. The reason agriculture spread is just because they kept having so many more children. When you're on a high-calorie diet, you tend to give birth more often. Tribal societies have fewer births than agricultural societies. So there were these women living in agricultural societies who were giving birth every year and a half or 2 years. And they had nutrient deficiencies. And so they were dying much more often at a young age. So you have this explosion of population. There's lots of kids, but there's fewer and fewer grandmothers. And that meant that those peoples didn't have the wisdom and the coordination and the trust to be able to organize and hunt the demons, the Wendigo. So in that landscape where you have an explosion of population and a reduction of elder women, and people are all strangers now, there's too many people to keep track of. It's not a tribe anymore. They start forming cities. That was the environment where con artists and abusers could stay active. They weren't getting caught. They weren't getting hunted. And so one of those psychopaths who we see in the genetic record, we see specifically when his DNA appeared and how it spread. And we see the effect on the population DNA for everyone across Eurasia, Middle East, North Africa, Northern India. We see the archaeological impact of as that DNA spread, what happened there. We have all the overlapping coincident lines of evidence, and they all line up in the same timeline. So this guy, this psychopath, Wendigo, he learned how to ride horses by taking a young horse away from their family, caging them, and beating them until they were submissive. And he decided to do the same thing to a little girl. And once she was enslaved, he had time to go do that to someone else, make another slave, and another one, and another one. And his children, who were like him, who inherited the psychopathic DNA, joined his team. So slowly at first, in one little spot, we see over the course of a few thousand years, that population of psychopaths ballooned regionally. And once they had a large enough group of evil horsemen, they were able to go out to a different tribe, kill all the men, sexually assault all the women, and kill the women who fought back. That was only a few thousand years ago. Barely 2% of human history. Very recently. Up until that point, it was wise grandmothers leading tribes. In agricultural societies, it was matrilineal female leaders. These guys, the psychopaths on horseback, were the ones who started worshiping a phallic symbol and imposing dominance from a young, muscular man. That's when it began. So, as they spread out and bred with surrounding populations, they would come back later to that other population they just abused and stolen from. Once the children there, the children of that sexual assault, had gotten old enough, and the children who were virtuous were killed, and the children who were submissive to the evil warlord were enslaved, and the children who were evil like the warlord joined the warlord army, and they kept spreading. And eventually there were so many of them around that if they tried to spread, they'd bump into each other. And so they all glommed together into a horde, and they'd invade as a whole war front. And at that point, it was 5,000 to 3,000 years ago, this is in that transition period, you see the descendants of this one dude, his DNA spreads across all of Russia and all of Europe in just a few hundred years. It was 6 to 10 miles a year, and that was enough to just take over the entire region of Eurasia, all the way out to the Tiantian Mountains, and all the way out to the coastline of France and Denmark. And everywhere they went, they killed off all the other men. We see all the other Y chromosome lineages gone from the DNA record, completely vanished. And everywhere they went, the population collapsed, and it didn't recover for 1 to 2,000 years. The biggest settlements on Earth at the time were completely abandoned and disappeared. And technology halted and fell backward. The invaders were able to imitate the technologies of the people they captured and killed and sexually assaulted, but they didn't make any innovations of their own. They were completely uninventive. And what we also see at the same time is they set up cities. There are many of them in Germany and surrounding areas. Cities which survived entirely on slave labor and cannibalism. They would go out into the countryside, grab a bunch of people, bring them back, and beat them as slaves until they died. And then they would eat the bodies and mash up the bones. So we have these giant pits of basically the trash heap was just human bones. And eventually they would depopulate that region and the city would collapse. It would only last a few hundred years. So that was the group of people who started worshiping a phallus and having a muscular young guy dominate and exploit his own people in a vicious hierarchy. That's when we see that appear in the archaeological record. Never before. Nowhere else before do we see that pattern of governance and social structure. So we have a word for that today. It's the opposite of matriarchy. And everywhere that they went, they had to kill off the people who were virtuous and intelligent because that's a threat to their power. And that's when we see in the record of people's bones, your actual skull brain to body ratio, that's when we see skulls start to shrink. So beginning 5,000 years ago and then accelerating 3,000 years ago, the skulls began to lose the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that deals with logic, reasoning, and planning. It started shrinking dramatically. Our brains had been getting bigger and bigger for hundreds of thousands of years, and then just around 5,000 years ago they do this, and 3,000 years ago they do this. And our brains are still currently shrinking 30 times faster than they'd ever grown. Because the big muscly guy who likes to sexually assault people and dominate them and exploit them and enslave them is afraid of intelligent and virtuous people. And he has to kill them. So that's the society we live in today. Is a society built by the warlord destroyer who steals and enslaves. We see their genetic lineage. We see the archaeological record. That's how it happened. That's what we're suffering from. So if a woman is attracted to bad boys, I have to warn you, That warlord was specifically breeding women who lusted after evil. If she was aroused by the warlord sexual assault thief, they had more kids. And in the last few thousand years, we see a radical shift, complete change in our composition of DNA. The genes that were rare have become common. Genes that were common have become rare across the board. There's been a huge shift in our genetic makeup in just the last few thousand years. And the women who were aroused by evil were bred. So you think about that.